Listen, Keir Starmer, he was in Scotland giving a talk. Take a listen to what he had to say about the right of British politics.
A dangerous right-wing politics. You want to know what Farage and Reform are doing on their rare visits to Parliament? They're voting against our employment rights bill. They talk the language of workers' rights online and on the doorstep, but they voted against banning fire and rehire. They voted against scrapping exploitative zero-hour contracts. They voted against sick leave and maternity pay. And what about the NHS? They want to charge people to use our NHS. They claim to be the party of patriotism, but they're fawning over Putin.
Harsh words, Rupert Lowe.
Well, I think,
Which
Michelle,
one of those accusations was false?
No, I think it's absolute rubbish, Barry. And what it shows you is that he's now like a rabbit in the headlights. He's worried about reform, and as I always say, it's better to be talked about than not talked about. So the fact he's talking about us means he's worried about the fact that we are winning votes from Labour now. And they've actually made it very easy for us. As I say, they've attacked virtually every sector of society that we do well. So whether it's farming, whether it's small businesses, whether it's education, whether it's the pensioners, just about everything they do. And now with Rachel Reeves and Angela Rayner, so to your point, Barry, what as Abraham Lincoln said, you don't make the poor richer by making the rich poorer. And what's happening is you are gradually destroying the private sector economy as a party. And the British public can see that. And that's not going to benefit anybody. And but listen, because Rachel Reeves is putting up taxes on the private sector, which is working harder and harder and running harder and harder like a hamster on a wheel. And she's then putting up the salaries of public sector workers. You're then wasting money in places like Mauritius, which you agree you shouldn't be. You are undermining the British economy. Is this a monologue or is it a conversation, Rupert? But what I like is Keir Starmer is frightened of reform. And I'll tell you why. Because we're going to take lots of votes off you. We're going to eviscerate Labour at the next election.
So now tell me, which one of the charges that he levied against you, was it the Employment Rights Bill? Was it fire and rehire? You remember when PN... Hang on, no, you had your say.
How many people do you employ?
You had your say.
Let me tell you, the employment rights...
You had your say, Rupert.
Employment rights are far too... far too tilted in favour of the employee and against the employer.
The public will see you blustering because you won't answer the question. Which one of the charges that was laid against you, charges in the NHS, whether it's looking to stop people being fired on the spot, that was a private member's bill I'd put through Parliament just 3 years ago, to stop P&O, who fired 800 people just like that, had people waiting to take them off the boats. That's what you supported in the bill that was going through. You supported an amendment against that.
Angela Rayner's employment rights bill is going to cost the private sector £5 billion.
Every single one.
That's not going to help. That's not going to help Britain.
Putin?
That's not going to help Britain. I've never supported Putin.
No, but Farage hasn't he?
No, not recently.
Sorry? Oh, recently? What about in GQ magazine when he said that this was the guy that he most respected in politics?
Well, that's Nigel's view. I've never said that.
Well, he is the leader of your party. You want me to justify what Keir Starmer does,
I think those comments were made in 2014, weren't they? Were they made in 2014?
Do you disagree? Well, they were made at a time when 5 people had just recently been executed in Russia for opposing Putin.
Over 10 years ago.
For opposing Putin. Okay?
Over 10 years ago, and you're quoting something that was said 10 years ago. No.
Because it goes to the heart of the man. Who does he respect? He respects a tyrant. He respected a dictator who had assassinated 5 people who had the guts to stand up against him in Russia. Do you support Putin?
But we're talking, Barry, about Putin? 4 things here.
Just answer the question,
The most important thing to the British people is whether or not our economy prospers. I've told you.
Answer the question.
I do not support Vladimir Putin.
Good. OK. So do you support Ukraine?
Equally, I don't support any form of dictatorship.
Do you support Ukraine?
Of course we have been supporting Ukraine.
Really?
I don't support putting British troops in Ukraine.
No, neither do I.
Because we haven't got enough bullets because we've underinvested in our armed forces.
Absolutely, Tories did that.
We can't fight.
That's why we're
send troops somewhere.
That's why Keir Starmer
but Keir Starmer made some
hollow
promises.
Don't speak over each other, or else people won't be able to
Come on,
hear.
Barry. You're getting a bit leery now.
Right, can you answer his questions then? He's repeating the same questions. He's asking you, what of the three are false?
Employment rights, Michelle. Angela Rayner's employment rights bill will damage Britain.
You voted
damage employment. And you're already seeing employment falling. Rayner has raised taxes on employment. So you've basically not only increased NI, you've also cut the threshold at which NI is charged. Straight tax on employment. As a result, it doesn't even start till April. As a result, employers are employing less people. You're seeing it everywhere. And I'm just waiting for the economy to implode. So, Barry, it's all very well to talk about that. The fact is, if the economy implodes, it affects everybody. It affects the people who employ people. It affects the people who
Rupert,
work.
I just want you to be straight.
The amount of tax
I just want you to be straight, OK?
Why?
If you say, yes, I do not want to ban zero-hour contracts, I do believe that firing and rehiring people is a perfectly acceptable practice, then say so. Because that's the way you voted. So why don't you tell the British public?
I don't believe in Angela Rayner's bill, which I think is overkill. As I've just said to you, I employ lots of people. We look after our people. It's in the interest of a good employer to look after his staff. We do, and we have people who work for us for 50 years, Barry. So I don't need the state to tell me how to treat people properly. And the problem is we've got too much state. We've got too many do-gooders like you who sit in judgment and tell everybody else how to live their lives. A good society, people find their own level and they work together in a civilised way.
You know what, Rupert?
You don't need a bunch of people who've never run a business telling you how to run it.
I have run a business, as you well know. I ran a business for 12 years in the city of London.
How many of your colleagues?
I ran a business for 12 years in the city of London.
How many of your colleagues
and it was
have
very
run a
successful.
business?
Thanks very much.
How many colleagues?
But my point to you is this. I would far rather people say I'm a do-gooder than that I'm a do-badder. And what your party was being accused of is being a do-badder.
No, Barry, that's not fair. And as my grandfather said, there's much more damage done in society by do-gooders than people who are out and out bad.
Tell it to the 800 people that were sacked by P&O that you did not support.
But can I...
Incorrect, Barry.
Can I just clarify something? So for quite some time, to a lay person here, it would feel like the Labour Party essentially ignored reform. I feel like you had a strategy of just ignore them, ignore them, ignore them. Then we got reports of what some would call like almost like a semi-secret cabinet meeting where the focus was how do the Labour Party respond to reform. You've all come away from that with clearly three prongs. You've got your NHS, your employment stuff, and then you've got your Ukraine and Russia. And whenever you kind of hear this conversation now, they are the three strings that will pull. So let me just ask for example, when it comes to employee rights, a poll, was it 2 weeks ago, I think it was, said that 72% of people value employee rights. So people at home will be saying, you know, I don't agree with fire and rehire and all the rest of it. But are you saying that the only way that employee rights could be respected was via that bill?
Of course not.
Is that what you're saying?
What the bill that I originally introduced into Parliament and that then became part of the employment, the New Deal that we've put through, that was the way that we worked out, very, very carefully, actually, with the top employment lawyers in the country, that it would mesh in with every other part of employment law to make sure that if somebody were using fire and rehire tactics, they could not do that without facing serious penalties unless they went through all the set steps.
Yeah,
and so
sure. But that's one element of the bill, though, isn't it? There's lots of different components.
One element, yeah, exactly right,
Michelle. It's a key element which they opposed. My point is, it's been the experience for literally hundreds of thousands of people in this country. Not just the 800 people at P&O. British Airways were doing it. Weetabix were doing it. Brush Electrical were doing it. British Gas were doing it. All of these
Those are all big public companies, Barry. You quoted big public multinationals. That the actual private businesses, which are the backbone of Britain, which you're doing your best to damage, they look after their staff. They have no interest in treating people badly. Because if you treat your staff badly, they don't work properly for you. So absolutely wrong, Barry. You're quoting multinationals who often don't pay a lot of tax here. They find ways of avoiding paying tax, as you well know, whereas people who work here, domiciled here, play a part in their local community, they're far more responsible than you would ever give them credit for.
Not at all.
Oh, yeah.
No, I give all our small business leaders and entrepreneurs credit.
And on the NHS, you asked me about the NHS.
But my point to you, Rupert, is that this is actually a piece of legislation, and it was in response to what Michelle asked, that was very carefully worked through so that it actually meshed with all the rest of the legislation and achieved its very limited objective to stop an employer saying to somebody on a Monday morning, terribly sorry, you're fired. But don't worry, you can come back tomorrow morning, you can have your job back, but we're taking £10,000 off your salary.
Barry Gardner, I would put it to you that you're being very selective in picking emotive things, because anyone with a brain cell is going to think, actually, the employer shouldn't be able to bin me off and then recruit me again tomorrow on less money.
I'm not picking them.
But what I'm saying to you is,
he picked them to oppose.
But what I'm saying to you is there have been many employers that look at this employment rights bill and actually have raised concerns about how that land leaves them in terms of as an employer. And by the way, we can all desire all of the employee rights, and I want employee rights as well. But if you've not got the jobs, if you're not employed in the first place, well, you're not going to have any rights, are you? Because you're not employed. Because
the point I was trying to make, Michelle.
And that's exactly what the legislation allowed.
What legislation?
The legislation that Labour has been putting through that I introduced into Parliament. So it actually says it's always going to be in the interests of the worker to ensure that the company survives. So there's always that get-out clause. But that was structured in the legislation, and if Rupert had read it well and thoroughly, then he would have realised that and voted for it.
What do you make to it at home? Because I know that these things, employee rights, I know it resonates and connects with a great deal of you. Have you looked at this bill? Do you actually sit there and think, if you voted against the bill, and that basically means that you're against workers, you're anti-worker? Do you think it's a bit more complicated than that, or what?